Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we are getting into a real icon, a plane that genuinely changed the game in the Pacific War, the Grumman F6F Hellcat.
Absolutely. A pivotal American carrier fighter.
Yeah, and we've got some great sources lined up. We're looking at a YouTube documentary transcript, the big Wikipedia article, some bits from an actual pilot's manual, which is cool, and even some online forum chats.
A good mix.
So the mission today really is to figure out why. Why did the Hellcat become the U.S. Navy fighter in the second half of the Pacific War? What made it so dominant?
And what impact did it have on, the way air combat unfolded out there?
Exactly. Thanks again for tuning in. And hey, if you enjoy these deep dives, do us a solid like, share, subscribe. It really helps us keep making more content like this.
It does, yeah. Okay, so origins. Where'd the Hellcat come from? It wasn't just dreamed up, right?
No, definitely not. It was a direct response designed specifically to replace the older F4F Wildcat.
But more than that, it was about taking on the Japanese Mitsubishi A6M Zero. That was the benchmark, the threat they had to beat.
And they got it going pretty quickly. Manufacturing 42 to 45, introduced in 43. First flight was June 42.
And it stuck around. Retired by Uruguay in 1960. That's some service life.
It really is. And the numbers, 12,275.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a lot of airplanes. And you can see the family resemblance to the Wildcat, can't you? People called it the Wildcat's big brother.
Yeah, looks similar. Bigger, definitely.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just scaled up, was it?
No, not at all. It was like an evolution based on hard lessons learned. There was some serious collaboration going on. Leroy Grumman, his top designers Swerble and Schwendler, working hand in glove with the Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics, BAWR, and crucially, getting feedback from experienced Wildcat pilots in early 42.
That pilot input seems key.
Yeah.
Real-world experience feeding back into the design.
Absolutely vital. And one name that pops up is Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare. He'd toured Grumman, and he knew the Wildcat versus Zero matchup inside out.
What was his big takeaway?
His request was simple: make it go upstairs faster. He wanted better climb performance, get the altitude advantage.
Makes sense. High ground and air combat.
And Bel Air, specifically Lieutenant Commander A.M. Jackson, chimed in too. His big thing was visibility.
The can't hit him if you can't see him line.
That's the one.
Okay.
He pushed for mounting the cockpit higher up, and they slooped the fuselage down towards the engine cowling, all about giving the pilot the best possible view.
Such a practical, combat-focused design choice.
It really was. Now, of course, there were prototypes and experiments along the way. The XF6F1 was the start.
And they tried different things, different guns.
Yeah, the XF6F4 was meant to have 4 20mm cannons. Never got produced, though.
Why not?
Sources don't spell it out, but maybe weight, complexity, or satisfaction with the standard 6.50 cals. They also tried turbochargers on the XF6F2.
Oh, for high-altitude performance.
Right, but the turbos back then were, well, a bit temperamental, not reliable enough for the rigors of carrier ops.
Okay. And then there was that speed demon, the XF6F6.
Ah, yes. 2,100 horsepower engine, supposedly hit 417 miles per hour. Imagine that. But the war ended before it could go into production.
Shame, in a way. But it sounds like the basic design they settled on was pretty solid from the get-go.
That's a key point from the sources. The fundamental design was sound. Didn't need constant major tweaks.
Which must have helped with that massive production rate.
Definitely. Allowed them to just churn them out. The last one rolled off the line in November 45. Incredible effort.
So, design shaped by combat needs, good visibility, solid base. How did it actually do when the shooting started?
Combat debut was September 1943. And it made an impression quickly. It was rugged, well-designed, just what the Navy needed for carrier work.
And against the Zero.
It consistently outperformed it. Better power, better protection, could dive away. It was a key factor in wrestling air superiority away from the Japanese in the Pacific.
The numbers are just staggering when you look at them. 5,223 enemy aircraft credited to Hellcats.
Across the U.S. Navy, the Marines, and the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm, yeah, more than any other Allied naval plane.
Mostly in the Pacific, right? 5,163 there.
That's right. Plus a handful in Europe during the invasion of southern France, and about 52 with the Fleet Air Arm. It was just dominant.
Even its first action sounds promising. September 1st, 43, off the USS Independence.
Yep, shot down a big Kawanishi Emily flying boat. A good start.
But then things really heated up. Tarawa, November 43.
Oh, yeah. Over Tarawa, they claimed 30 Zeros shot down for just one Hellcat loss.
30 to 1. That's
It
incredible.
really sets the tone. And later that same month, over Rabaul, flying with Corsairs, they claimed nearly 50 Japanese planes, including Zeros again.
Just relentless pressure.
And it leads to that famous statistic you hear, the overall kill ratio for Hellcat pilots, an amazing 19-1.
19-1. Downing over 5,100 enemy aircraft in just 2 years. That accounted for, what, 75% of the Navy's total air victories?
75%. It's almost unbelievable. But it wasn't just luck or even just the plane. Well, the plane was definitely part of it. Superior power meant better energy fighting tactics. It could take a beating and keep flying, unlike the Zero. And the visibility we mentioned.
Right.
But U.S. Navy tactics were also evolving, learning from those early Wildcat fights. Teamwork was becoming doctrine.
Okay, so tactics played a big role too. What about the key hardware features beyond visibility? That engine must have been important.
Huge factor. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, 2,000 horsepower.
That's the same engine as the Corsair and P-47 Thunderbolt, right?
Exactly. A proven, powerful, reliable engine. And later on, the F6F5's got an upgraded version, 2,200 horsepower with water injection.
Water injection for a power boost.
Yeah, gave them a temporary surge in power for critical moments, take off from the carrier, or maybe getting out of trouble in a dogfight.
And essential for carrier ops, those folding wings. The stow wing.
Absolutely crucial. Let them pack way more planes onto a carrier deck and below in the hangar bay. Grumman's design was ingenious.
So, powerful engine, tough airframe, folding wings, great visibility. It sounds like they really thought about the carrier environment.
Meticulously. You mentioned the later of S6F3s getting the water-injected engine, too.
Yeah, the sources say later production blocks of the NF3 got the same engine as the NF5. Must have been a nice upgrade for those pilots.
Definitely closed the gap with the NF5 performance-wise. And then you had the specialized versions, too. Night fighters were important.
Right, the F6, F3E, and Neg-3N.
Yep, different radar systems. The Neg-3E had an early set. The Neg-3N had a more advanced one for the time. Finding targets in the dark Pacific was a challenge.
And the F6, F5 variant, that seemed like a refinement based on combat experience.
Exactly. They tweaked the engine cowling for better airflow, put in a new windscreen, stronger, with the bulletproof glass integrated right in.
Safer for the pilot.
Much safer. Redesigned ailerons for better roll rate, stronger tail surfaces to handle the power, and most Neg-5s got that overall glossy sea blue paint job.
Distinctive look. And they kept the night fighter roll going with the Neg-5N.
They did. Fitted with the ANA PS6 radar. Some even got mixed armament 20mm cannon alongside the .50 cals, packing a real punch for night intercepts.
In a photo recon version, too, the F6F5P.
Yeah, though not many were converted. Shows the airframe was adaptable, though.
It really does. And the British used them quite a bit under Lend-Lease.
They did, had their own designations. Gannett Mark III initially for the F6F3, then Hellcat Mark I. The F6F5 was the Hellcat Mark II.
And Hellcat NF Mark II for the night fighter, FR Mark II for the photo recon.
You got it. Shows how widely it was adopted. There was even talk of building them in Canada, the FV1 by Canadian Vickers.
So that didn't happen.
No, project got canceled. Still, interesting possibility.
Now, a great plane needs great pilots. Any standout names associated with the Hellcat?
Well, one really unique story is Dean Diz Laird, only U.S. Navy pilot in WWII to shoot down both German and Japanese planes while flying Hellcats.
Wow. How did he manage that? Different theaters.
Presumably, yes. An incredible achievement. But beyond individuals, the sources, especially that Reddit discussion, talk about tactics.
Right. You mentioned the Navy learning from the Wildcat versus Zero fights.
Exactly. They gathered data, analyzed it, and that fed directly into Hellcat design and the tactics they taught pilots. Things like the FAC weave.
Teamwork tactics.
Very much so, emphasizing mutual support. Quite different, the sources suggest, from maybe the German approach or particularly the Japanese focus on individual pilotgil, that sort of warrior ethos.
And the U.S. system of rotating experienced pilots back to train new ones. That must have helped maintain quality.
Huge difference, potentially. Instead of keeping aces in combat until they were lost, like the Axis often did, the U.S. system spread that experience around, built a deeper pool of competent pilots as the war went on.
Which leads to that question raised online. Would the Hellcat's amazing kill ratio have been quite so high against, say, late-war German fighters? The FW-190 or Me-109G?
It's a fair question. The consensus seems to be probably not as high. The Hellcat was great, but benefited from fighting an enemy, the Japanese, whose pilot experience was declining sharply later in the war.
And the Zero itself, while upgraded, had its limits compared to newer Allied planes.
Right. Its airframe couldn't really take the stresses of higher speeds and G-loads, as well as the Hellcat or Corsair. Japan did develop some potentially excellent late war fighters, like the Ki-84, the N1K2J George, the Ki-61.
But they had problems.
Big problems. Quality control issues, engines not being reliable, not enough trained pilots, or even fuel sometimes. They just couldn't field them effectively in large enough numbers.
And that captured Zero back in '42, the Akutan Zero. That gave the Allies a huge intelligence boost, didn't it?
Immense value. Confirmed what they suspected, revealed weaknesses, allowed them to develop specific don't-do-this tactics against it, knowing your enemy.
Crucial. Okay, so after the war, what happened to all those Hellcats?
Well, in U.S. Navy frontline service, they were phased out relatively quickly by newer jets and piston fighters. But the night fighter version, the F6F5N with radar,
They stuck around.
yeah, until 1954 in that specialized role, still useful.
And the British ones.
The FAA Hellcats were replaced pretty fast by British designs post-war. And sadly, a lot of Lend-Lease planes, if they weren't returned or paid for.
They got dumped. At sea.
Yeah, apparently large numbers were pushed overboard off Scotland, for example. Kind of a sad end for aircraft that served so well.
Wow. A reminder of the sheer scale of it all.
Yeah.
But thankfully, quite a few survived.
Yes, quite a good number, actually. You can find them in museums across the U.S. and U.K., Fleet Air Arm Museum in Britain.
And places like the Collins Foundation, Commemorative Air Force, National Naval Aviation Museum in the States.
Exactly. And some are even kept in flying condition, which is fantastic. Plus, ongoing restoration projects. The legacy is being preserved.
That's great to hear. Now, briefly, that pilot manual, what kind of insights did we get from that?
Well, the excerpts were limited, but they give you a feel for it. Lots of warnings, cautions. These were complex machines.
Right, not something you just jump into and fly.
Definitely not. And the diagrams, like the one for the electrical panel, show the complexity the pilot had to manage.
And specific controls mentioned, like the intercooler shutter, cabin air, hints at the system's management involved.
Exactly. It wasn't just stick and rudder. Pilots had to actively manage the engine and various systems throughout the flight, demanding work.
So, wrapping this up, what are the big takeaways on the Hellcat?
I think, number one, its absolutely vital role in winning air superiority in the Pacific. It arrived when needed and did the job.
And its design advantages were key power, toughness, visibility, especially against the Zero.
Definitely. And that incredible kill ratio, that 19-to-1, while we acknowledge the context of pilot training and enemy decline, it still speaks volumes about the aircraft and the skill of the U.S. Navy and Marine pilots who flew it.
A true turning point in the Pacific Air War. It really shifted the balance.
Without a doubt. Paved the way for everything that followed.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. World War II saw incredibly fast aircraft development. What if the Pacific War had gone on another year, say into 1946? How might the Hellcat itself have evolved, and what kind of tougher opponents might it have started facing?
Ooh, interesting hypothetical. Jets starting to appear, maybe improved Japanese designs finally reaching the front. Yeah, something to think about. We definitely encourage you to dig into the sources we use today if you want to learn more.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for joining us for this deep dive on the Grumman F6F Hellcat. Hope you found it interesting.
Yeah, hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.